Welcome to the Flower Branch Embroidery Quilt Sew Along. Today we are talking about tools. I wanted to just give a quick overview of the basic tools that you need and some of the additional tools that we've been talking about, just so that you understand what they do, how to use them, and whether or not you need to get them if you don't already have them. There's no rush. We're obviously working on this quilt over the next 9 weeks. You may find that you want some things once you get started, but this will just give you a chance to see what the possible tools are that you want to have, and really you just need sort of the bare bones, the bare minimum for this project. So we are making the flower branch embroidery quilt. This is the full schematic or picture of the pattern. It is a beautiful pixel quilt of a flower branch. And I think these patterns are based off of cross stitch slash embroidery designs. And so they have this beautiful pixelated look. So really, because of this, we just need very, very simple tools. This is a patchwork project. I'll talk about what the essential tools are, and then I'll talk about some of the bonus tools, let's say whether you have those in your kit or whether you look for those as you think you need them. So to start off with, we really are just going to be cutting the same size over and over again. So it's very simple in terms of the cutting. You just need a rotary cutter for sure. The size is up to you. 45, I really like the 28. It's just a little bit smaller. I like the way that it feels in my hand. So this is the one that I reach for more often than not. This one also, if you in the future want to work with clothing or want to have a little bit more free motion with your cutting, you can do curves and maneuver the smaller cutter quite easily. So we just need to have a rotary cutter, your choice, your brand, your style that you like, and then a ruler. So one of these quilting rulers, it just needs to be a minimum of 2 inches wide. A length that's going to give you enough length to pass over the pieces of fabric that we're cutting. So something like, this is a 3 by 18. This is a pretty common size. A very very common size is this one here, which is the 6 by 24. This is kind of the go-to ruler in quilting because it is wide enough to do multiple widths, but also long enough to pass over like a full fat quarter opened up, plus other sizes. So this is a really great ruler to have if you were just going to get one. A lot of people just get this one to start off with. So the size of your ruler, which ruler you have, you may have one already. That doesn't really matter. Just pick a ruler, use the ruler that you have in your toolkit, but you do need a ruler. So that's essential. We want to have some kind of cutting mat usually, because if you're using a rotary cutter, we want to be cutting into a cutting mat of some kind. These are a sort of rehealable mat. So when you run your blade over them, they sort of take the blade and then they kind of seal back up. So we want to be cutting on a surface that can take the cutting blade, and obviously we don't want to be cutting on our actual tables or things like that. So we want to have a nice cutting mat. And so I would say, there's various sizes of cutting mats. This is a pretty good size one. This is, looks like it's 24 by 18. So this is a nice size because it will sort of fit the, the smaller fabrics that we're using. We're not really using, we've got yardage of the background fabric, but we're working a lot with sort of smaller fat quarters, so we don't need to have a huge amount of space, and the pieces that we're cutting are also pretty small, so that's also very helpful. So you need to have that. And then you want to have an iron. We are definitely going to be doing a lot of pressing, so we want to have a nice iron that you can use, or whatever iron that you have is going to be great, and an ironing surface. So a couple things about the ironing surface. Obviously, most people may have an ironing board, so you can use that, of course. I use a portable ironing mat that I've made, and so this is just a piece of plywood wrapped in batting and then a layer of Essex, which is a cotton and linen yarn dyed fabric. This is a project that we did in Handmade Getaway. So there is a little project in here to make your own mat, your own sort of travel mat or portable mat. What's nice about having a smaller mat size is this could kind of sit beside you. So if you kind of want to get in, create like a little zone for yourself where you have sort of everything that you need within sort of arm's reach, and you're not having to get up and get and move a lot. So because we're doing a lot of smaller pieces, you could technically just sort of have everything within, you know, small area when you get set up to do all your sewing and pressing. One of these mats is great, but a lot of folks have been getting the little wool mats, and these come in a variety of sizes. So this is also a nice option because it can, you know, it's very easy. It's basically just a very thick piece of felted wool. And we have this in a bunch of sizes. This is one of the smaller ones, but it comes in sort of a nice dimensions that you could also have. And it's very lightweight, very easy to store, and very easy to have beside you on your desk. So that's really helpful. Pins at the minimum, you're going to need something to put your fabrics together. So I really like to use the sort of smaller glass head pins. So they're just like a thinner pin that goes through the fabric. The chambray is a little bit more fine than like a regular quilting cotton. So some of those bigger quilting pins may feel a little bit chunky when you're using them on your fabric. So some kind of pin at the minimum, and then thread. So you're going to need, I estimated, and again, this is just purely an estimate based on the amount of sewing that we need to do, about, you know, just over, you know, 1.5 of these bigger spools. So this is, I think I calculated maybe say 700 meters of sewing. I don't know how right that is. I've never actually, I mean, the math, you know, I did the math, but I'm curious to see how that actually translates. So you need 2 of spools of a neutral thread. Really, it doesn't really matter. We're sewing through a lot of different colors. And then you've got your background fabrics. We suggested a couple colors that match the background fabrics, but honestly, if you've got some nice neutrals in your stash that you kind of want to sew through, this is a good opportunity to use those up. And so you just want to have sort of a nice quality thread on hand. So that's the bare bones. So that's, if you have those and your sewing machine, you're good to go. You don't really need anything else more than that. I did just want to go through some of the additional possible tools that we've been talking about and that some of us are using, just in case you want to understand why and how they work. So first off, I just want to talk about and show you the Stripology ruler. So the Stripology ruler is kind of a perfect companion for this project because it is designed specifically to cut strips of fabric, and that's all we're cutting. So what I've done with the way that we're going to do this pattern is we're going to cut strips of fabric and we're going to sew strips of fabric together. The way that the pattern was designed, they have you cut the strips of fabric, but then you cut them down into little individual squares. And then you sort all the squares out, and then you sew the individual squares one at a time to each other, building up this, you know, 2,000 plus piece square quilt. That seems totally bonkers to me. So what we're going to do instead is figure out a method and sort of a strategy so that we're just sewing all the pairs of colors together into strips, and then we will sew those together so that we've got pairs of fabric together, and then we'll be cutting the strip pairs down, and then those will get assigned to the different places in the quilt, and that's all sort of been figured out for you. So the Stripology ruler is kind of ideal because we're literally just going to be cutting strips and strips and strips of fabric, and they're all going to be the same dimension. So everything that we're cutting for the quilt is 2 inches. So it's just going to be very simple. There's no changing of the measurements. We're starting off by cutting 2-inch strips. And then when we subcut the strip pairs together, we're cutting them down into 2-inch pieces. So everything is 2 inches, and that just keeps everything very easy to work with. So the way that the Stripology ruler works is you'll have your fabric. So this is the sage fabric, and this is one of the extra pieces. So this is one of the larger quarter-meter pieces that you'll have in your kit if you got the kit, and there are 4 greens where we needed a little bit more than the fat quarter that's in the bundle. You can basically take these pieces, you can fold them over onto themselves so that they're sort of half width, and that's going to mean that they will sit really nicely underneath the whole Stripology squared ruler. And then the ruler has all of these little slots, and each of the slots is very clearly marked. So we're going to be sort of starting at 0, and then we're going to do 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, working our way in 2s across the ruler. The nice thing about this ruler is that when we lay this down, we're able to cut 6 strips very easily and very accurately without moving the ruler. When we use a regular ruler, so let's say I'm using this ruler, we'll be putting the ruler down on top of our fabric after we square things up. We would cut our first, we would cut, I'm gonna pretend cut. We would cut our 2-inch piece, then we would pull that away, then we would move our ruler, and then we're gonna cut, move that away, cut, moving the ruler like across the fabric. I have been using this method, lots of people have been using this method forever. This is a perfectly valid way to do this project, or any quilting project. This is really all that you need. But if you've been sewing for a long time, if you like the efficiencies, if you enjoy a good tool, if you want to go a little bit faster and to have that extra accuracy of not moving the ruler, and also having every 2 inches be exactly the same. So when I'm moving a ruler across at 2 inches and lining it up, it should be the same, but also the ruler might slip a little bit, and I may slide the ruler and land the ruler maybe not exactly the same every single time, but it should be very, very close, probably within a tolerance that you never would notice. The beauty of the Stripology ruler, and I'm just gonna do a quick cut. So to start off with, when we're cutting them, we're going to just cut off, sort of the raw edge. So I'm going to use the lines on the ruler off my folded piece of fabric, and I'm going to line that up to start, and then I'm lining it up here on the end with one of the lines, just so I can kind of get a clean cut off one of these edges here. So I'm just putting my ruler into the little slot, and then pushing away. So if you've not used a rotary cutter before, so let me just make sure I got that. If you've not used a rotary cutter before, I'll talk a little bit more about that in one of the following videos about sort of some basic patchwork techniques. You're always going to want to cut away from yourself, and you're always going to want to close your cutter and be very mindful of an open blade. So these are very sharp, basically roller blade on wheels. So you want to be very, very careful with them. Always keep the cutters closed. When you're not actively using it, it should not be open. So you never want to leave the blade open, and you could accidentally sort of nick yourself, and it is quite a dangerous tool, so be very careful with them. The Olfa cutters that we sell now are sort of really nice because once you release them from your hand, they close automatically. So that's a really great rotary cutter for a beginner or someone who just doesn't want to have to think about that. So from there, I have my first cut. I gotta change the blade on that one. So I was using this bigger cutter, so I've got that set up. This one you want to make sure also that you've got a fresh blade, because, so this one I didn't end up using that cutter initially. I put a fresh blade on this one, and I was using this. So this is the blade I'm gonna use. So I've got a fresh cut there. I'm gonna just flip this around because we're gonna work from left to right. So once I've got a fresh, clean cut, I'm just gonna line up my ruler again on top. So now I'm gonna, and actually I could have just done that on the ruler. So just by offsetting things, I may do that anyways. So here we go. So lining everything up, I've got my sort of a little bit of the edge overhanging off the 0 line, so I'll get a proper clean cut there. And I'm lining up the bottom fold along here, and I can kind of double check myself as everything's even along the top as well. So from there, I'm just going to put a bit of pressure on the side of the ruler, watch my fingers, put my blade into the 0 groove. That'll be my first cut. And then I can just go over to the 2, put my blade into the 2 slot, and then just press. So I'm just going to go across 2, 4, 6, 8, and then you should be able to get a 10. I've already trimmed this down a little bit because I was doing something else with it, so it's a little bit short. So what's nice about this is now I can kind of peel off the bits that were not full 2 inches, and then now I've got my perfect 2-inch strips easily. And so you can see how once you get going, you can kind of cut your strips very quickly and get into a nice groove. And depending on how confident you are and how fresh your blade is, you may be able to layer, you know, maybe 2 fat quarters. But I feel like the yardage pieces that we're working with, the greens, they're doubled over, so that is kind of plenty. That's cutting 4 layers at once. So that gives me sort of a nice a long strip, and those are ready to go. So very easily we can cut out the strips that we need. And the instructions that I'm going to give you will tell you exactly how many strips you need. So for every color, you're going to know how many strips you need to cut. So it will all be very clear. So we're not cutting everything. So you definitely don't want to just start cutting up all your fabric. We're going to be very methodical about how we do it, and I've got a very detailed strategy. So hold on to actually jumping into the cutting until we get to that step. So that's how the Stripology ruler works. I just wanted to give a quick little explanation and a little demo so that you could see how that works. When we're sewing our strips together, we're going to be doing a lot of finger pressing, so pressing the seams, and I like to press the seams to the side. So we want to sort of give everything a press to the side. So depending on how and where you're working, these little wooden seam rulers are really nice and they're very popular. So they're just a way to kind of do your pressing without the iron. So if you didn't have an iron beside you, you can sit and do a bit of the pre-pressing with the roller. And this tool is nice as well, like if you ever are working on a project where you can't use an iron. So when we did the Weekender sew along, we couldn't iron the oil skin or the oilcloth that we were using, the dry oil skin. So this tool was great because we could press those seams really easily and really firmly with this sort of wooden ruler. So that's great. You can finger press, so you can actually use your fingers, your nails to press, but we're doing a lot of that, and so you may find that it's a bit much for your hands, and you may want a tool to do that. So if you want that, or you may have a small iron, or you may have your iron set up beside you and you may not need that. So it's just a nice extra tool to have on hand. I've got a couple tools that I like to use that I found that I'm liking to use on the sewing machine, and I'll demonstrate how I use those as well in a future video. When I'm at my sewing machine, I like to use a few specific tools. One of them I'll show you close up is called the stiletto. So this is the stiletto. I'll just bring all the tools over here. So these are the tools that might work additionally at your sewing machine. So the stiletto is, I like this in particular because it's very thin. I find it, you know, you can kind of hold it like a pencil, how you would hold a pen or a marker. And I usually am using this to sort of press down and sort of help to feed something through the sewing machine. So I will use this and I'll demonstrate how I use this. I've been finding for these smaller pieces, it was very helpful because we'll be sort of feeding lots of little pieces in over and over again to the machine. And it's just really hard in some cases to get your fingers right under the presser foot. So this is kind of a nice tool to be able to do that. You can use this tool similarly. This is the bamboo point turner from Merchant & Mills. And for this tool, it's the same idea. It's just a point that you can kind of press and help to feed under the presser foot. So you get that a little bit of pressure in a spot where you might not be able to get your fingers right into. And the Swiss tweezer is another tool that you could use similarly. Like you can use these by putting them the point down and helping to feed. So if you have any of these tools already in your kit, you could try to use them in this particular capacity, see if they're helpful to you. I'll demonstrate each of these, or the ones that I'm using when we get to the sewing part, but I have been finding these to be particularly useful and helpful for me. Since we're talking about the sewing machine, I just wanted to mention the 1/4 inch foot. So if you have a 1/4 inch foot, and I know a bunch of people did get them for their machines, this is just a great way to keep a consistent seam allowance. So we are going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance for the entire project. And the main thing here is just keeping a consistent 1/4 inch. So we're going to sort of set ourselves up in the beginning, and we want to just stick with everything to be the same 1/4 inch. And so I would say more than anything, that's the most important part, because what we don't want is we don't want our 1/4 inch to be a little bit smaller one day and then a little bit bigger the next day. We will either be using washi tape. I'll show you a few different ways that we can kind of check our 1/4 inch and keep it the same. So if you have a 1/4 inch foot, then that's a really great way, because that foot is your 1/4 inch. And if you're always lining your fabric up to the edge of the foot, then you should be able to keep a very consistent 1/4 inch throughout the entire project. You can balance that by adding some washi tape to your machine. We've got on the little grid guide template piece that we made, we did add in some little 1/4 inch markings on here as well. So you can sort of check your 1/4 inch on your machine with the little guide as well as an option. So there's a few things, and we'll go over that more specifically, but that is these are sort of some specific machine tools. We're going to be doing something called chain piecing. So it's just where we're going to, because we're sewing lots of little pieces, we're going to kind of be feeding them in one after the other and not cutting the threads between them. So we're going to be using a lot of keeping everything connected in sections, and then you'll have kind of everything. It almost looks like a little piece of bunting when it comes off the machine. They're all joined together. And so because of that, and because I did actually, to make this the sample piece that I did, which was the unit 6. Here, this is the one. This is the unit I did. So here is unit 6. So this is the one that I put together here, and that's the one that's on the wall behind me. So the unit 6, in order to sew this, I had lots of little pairs of fabric, and then I had to, sort of sew them in little sections together. So you end up with these little chains, and it's a lot of snipping to snip them apart. I kept them, I had a little strategy, which I'll share with you, which was it helped to keep things organized. So to sew them to the next stage, actually having them connected was really helpful. But I got myself this tool, which I have been wanting for a little while, and this seems like the perfect project for it. So I'm got myself one of these little, I think it's called like a patchwork cutter. So this is basically just a little stand tool, and there's a little blade, and it's actually just a rotary cutter blade. So this is a really great way to use your old rotary cutter blades, can then be used for this tool. So essentially what will happen is you'll have all of these chain pieced pieces that are going to be pieced together, and then you're going to want to be sort of cutting them apart. And so what you'll do is you'll have all of these little threads, and you'll just be able to kind of cut, 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 cut. So I was using my cutter on my sewing machine to do this. So I just sat at my sewing machine, and there's a cutter on the side of my machine, so I was using that. But I could see while I was doing that this was just going to be a nice little addition to my toolkit. So we have a few of these. This is just kind of another interesting tool that I'm excited to try and to use and incorporate into my project. But all you need really is a little pair of snips. So it's just one of those, there's a lot of repetition in this project. And so it's just how do you want to do the repetitions. That's one way I'll be doing that, but scissors work. So use your scissors, whether you have like little snips, big scissors, or the cutter on your machine. So as I said, I was just actually sitting by my machine and using the little cutter that was on my machine, which worked perfectly well. But I've been eyeing this for a while, so this just made me feel like the right project to go for it. So I'm using one of those little patchwork cutters. And oh, wonder clips. So wonder clips are becoming more and more helpful, I find, in my sewing practice. So this is a project I think where they will be very helpful. I really do love to use pins, but I did find it to be a little bit cumbersome to be pinning some of, like when we had to do like a lot of little pieces. I just found it was a lot easier just to quickly clip, and so I've been using the clips. But the other thing that the clips are great for, not only for sort of clipping the little pieces together in certain situations, but also like you can clip, you know, little stacks. So it's like if as you're organizing your piles of pieces, you can kind of clip a little section together. So the clips come in handy in a lot of ways. They're also great. I mean, I first got these because of doing quilt bindings. So this was sort of the pitch for this product, I think initially, was that it's great for doing your quilt binding instead of pins, and I totally love them for that. But I've been finding more and more uses for the wonder clips. This is the regular size. There's the mini size, which has the little point. I think those are really useful. I might be trying those ones out with this project as well. I have quite a few, I have 2 jars of clips. I probably have enough, but I'm also just curious to see how the little mini wonder clips work, because they've got like a bit of a pointier, a more fine point. But these are awesome. We were using these also in the Weekender bag sew along because we couldn't use pins. So again, we couldn't use an iron and we couldn't use pins. So the wonder clips were really great for that. And I have been using them as well in my clothing projects. So I've recently just started using them for some of the longer seams where I just need to have everything sort of held together. So the wonder clips are sort of a nice alternative. Again, not an essential tool, but these are sort of some of the little tools that, you know, do just feel very helpful when you're doing something that is very repetitive. I did just want to mention, again, this is not an essential tool, but I'll try to explain a little bit why this tool was invented, or why we created this tool. I've done pixel quilts before, and the thing with the pixel quilt is when you're working on it, depending on what section you're working on and what part of the assembly you're doing, you need to see, if you're looking at the schematic, you need to see a very specific zone. And so initially what we're going to be working with like our pairs. So we're going to be needing to know what are the first 2 pairs going all the way down the first row. And so just being able to visually look only at the 2 rows that you need is extremely helpful. And then you just like move that over to the next section when you're ready. So we can kind of like just focus in on the sections that you need and not get confused by all of the other numbers. And then all of these other sizes, again, are for different parts of the construction. So depending on what stage you're at, you may want to then look for the next stage after, you know, you may need to see this little square here because you might be starting to assemble a little square unit that's going to come together. So then you really just want to see these squares only as well. So this just gives us, you know, sort of a really easy way. You can make this out of cardboard, which is what I used to do. I used to just have a little piece of cardboard and a piece of washi tape, and I would just have this taped to my pattern for the section that I was working on. And it's very, all it is just to give you some focus and so that you don't get confused. And so I feel like you can make one of these if you want to, but this gives you the exact dimensions of all the potential ways that you might want to just look at one section as you're working on one of the units. Just a little piece of washi tape, and then you can kind of move it around for whatever area you're doing, like that. And so that just gives you a little window. And then we just added in this little 1/4 inch marking just as it was kind of a like, why not? We can add this into the tool. So you can use this to drop your needle into that hole, and you can easily see if you've got your 1/4 inch. So it's just an easy tool to help you with that. So I think those are the main tools and the extra tools. I think I've covered all of them. If there's anything else that you're thinking of using, or if that you had any questions about any of these tools, these are sort of the basics, and then some of the bonus tools. You can definitely leave a comment or leave a question in the online community space, and we can go through that. I guess the other thing that I did want to mention is you maybe want to just think about a way to organize your pieces, and I think maybe that's something that we'll talk about as well. I feel like I'm curious to see what other quilters have used in the past when they're working on a quilt project. So I know some people will use a little like bin, and they just put all of their pieces in the bin. So Ziploc bags might be handy, little envelopes, because we're going to also have these like little sections, and that's why I also had the labels created. So the labels are as well also to help us just stay really organized, because everything that we're doing is pretty simple in terms of the sewing, but we just are going to want to be very organized about our colors, our pairs, and then all of the little units as we start to sew and cut things up. So the labels are going to help, but then you're going to have all these little piles. So maybe just think about ways that you might potentially sort of wrangle and keep your pieces organized. I know that in the past I've used like a pizza box. Wasn't actually a pizza box, so it was like from another thing that I had, but it was shaped like a pizza box. And I found that was kind of just a helpful sort of like thin, skinny box size that I could just put all my pieces into when I wasn't actually working on the quilt, if you need to pack things away. So something to think about, something that we can talk about more. I would love to hear your ideas and the ways that you organize yourself when you do a big quilt project. Those are sort of my thoughts. I know that little Ziploc bags and little envelopes and those kinds of things, and also the Wonder Clip. So like kind of like having everything clipped together and then organized in order. So okay, so we're getting so close to getting started. We're starting June 8th. The flower branch embroidery quilt sew along is going to be really fun. Just getting you hyped up, getting you prepared. Any questions, just let me know, and hopefully this was helpful. Let me know in the comments. Emily is here cheering you on, and I can't wait to get started. I will see you all soon.